this episode of In the House, we sit down with Aaron Prinz. Aaron is the creator of the Designed podcast, produced by Architectural Record. We discuss Aaron's unique background as a comedian and what led him into the field of architecture. He tells us what inspired him to start his podcast, and we talk about some of the amazing guests he has brought on over the years. We hope you like this episode. If you do, share with a friend and give us a 5-star rating. Thanks for listening. Welcome to this episode of In the House. Today we are speaking with Aaron Prinz. Aaron's background includes being a designer for Page Sutherland. He has experience working with Matt Ficus Architecture as a design associate and is currently a designer at Michael Shue Office of Architecture here in Austin, Texas. So by day, Aaron is just a humble architect, but by night, he becomes the host of the Designed podcast produced by Architectural Record. And the Designed podcast has featured some of the most renowned architects in modern history, such as Art Gensler, Kengo Kuma, and Tom Kundig, just to name a few. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Oh my goodness. You're nicer than my parents. That was a lot.
Yeah, oh, well, you know.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No, absolutely. So we tried to get you on, maybe a month ago, and then you had pneumonia?
I did have pneumonia, yeah.
Wow.
Sorry for that. I apologize.
No, not a problem.
I got sick on Wednesday, and I think we were supposed to record on Monday, and I was like, I'll be fine by Monday. And then Sunday I was like, I think I'll be fine tomorrow. And I was like, I gotta call it because I was going to die. But
oh yeah.
Thank you for rescheduling and accommodating me a little bit later.
And you also had a kid just a few months ago?
Yeah, I had a second son a few months ago, so we've been a little bit in the woods about scheduling, and everything is not as easy as it used to be, so I would say.
Your second one. Man, congrats.
Congratulations.
That's awesome.
Thank you. It's been nothing but chaos, and so, yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Do you have kids?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One. She's, what?
10?
10?
Yep.
Dang. Gosh.
Can't wait.
It's awesome.
So they can stay in a room by themselves. like the living room. You can leave them in the living room or to the bathroom. Yeah.
Well, how old? So you got the newborn, right? A few months, and then how old's your
I have a 3-year-old as well. So we're like in all the mood swings.
That's kind of the age gap I have. I got 5 and 2. No, 5 and 3. Sorry, 5 and 3.
5 is when I think all the data input from the first 5 years, that's when it starts coming back out. Like, okay.
In a good way, or yeah.
Comprehending enough to start analyzing and giving you feedback now. 5 is when I think it just starts to get more awesome every day.
Well,
I would agree.
There's hope. That's good.
Yeah.
No, the kids are fun. And, in all honesty, I think when I had my first one, I was doing the podcast. I started while I was in school at University of Texas at Austin. And I was doing it I would wake up. I was a big in school, studio at 6 or 7 in the morning, leave at 5 and have a life afterwards. So I wasn't the all-nighter type of guy, and my work probably reflected it. But I think, and then I was on the schedule where I was doing that, recording interviews whenever my guests had time, going home, eating dinner with my wife. She'd go to bed, and then I would stay up till 2 in the morning just editing. Because these episodes, for people that don't know, take 4 or 5 hours to put together by the time they're done, right? And so I did that for 2 and something years. It was a while. And then we were having my first son, and that's kind of, I don't know if you had this realization when you started to have kids, when you're like, oh, I need to I can't just do things for fun anymore. And so, within reason, you know what I mean? So that's when I started reaching out to larger networks to try to get this going, because it was either I had to start making money at it or I had to stop doing it. And so I reached out. There was a magazine in London or England somewhere that was interested in it, and an Architectural Record was interested in it. And I think, looking at kind of the history of architecture, if you will, Architectural Record's the oldest and longest running magazine. It's like 130 something years old.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, and I mean, it has such a history within architecture. Like, I feel like to get published in Record was like a huge thing. So just to be part of that for me, I think it's been rewarding in itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Tell us kind of about your history. I mean, are you initially from Austin or Texas? I mean, where did you grow up and what was your family like and how'd you get here?
Oh my God. No, none of the above.
Why German?
What's that?
And why German?
German.
You majored in German.
Oh, you guys did some research. I was back there pouring drinks and I was like, why German? No, so I grew up actually in a small town in Northern California called Red Bluff. 12,000 people, third largest 3-day rodeo in the country.
Wow.
Little small cowboy town. And I went to the University of Oregon and I dropped out and I majored in German, as it's been pointed out. But I studied abroad in Germany for a year, so I already spoke German. Not a big school guy, if you will. So I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. And I didn't drop out. But ended up back in my hometown, and my dad, both my parents were teachers since I was like 6. But before that, my dad worked at the paper mill like every other person in the town, making, Simpson strong ties. They had Simpson paper. And he blew out his knee, tired of doing it. And so him and his friend bought, this is in like the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, digitizing tablet for early stage AutoCAD. You know what I'm talking about? It was like this big pad, and now we have the ribbon on the screen. It was like this 24 by 24 inch tablet, and you had all the commands were, you had like your screen space and you had to go find, it was weird. That Apple IIe computer, and they just started doing spec houses in my hometown while he went to college. So he graduated college and stopped doing it. Fast forward, built their design, built his own house, contractor liked his plans, started drawing plans again when I was probably 9 or 10. And then he was teaching me to do AutoCAD, so I would do the dimension sheet and the electrical sheet, and do the lighting and draw the line to the switch and whatever, you know what I mean? So that sort of stuff.
So that was your introduction into architecture.
Yeah. And then, dude, this is going to be a long story, and I apologize.
Go for it. No, we got a lot of time.
But since I was 7 years old, all I wanted to do was be a stand-up comedian. That's all I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I would watch.
I read about that. I was looking forward to talking about
that. Oh yeah, so I would watch Seinfeld when I was little, and there was like, I was such a little comedy nerd. Like, I cried at the last episode of Seinfeld and all this stupid crap. But you'd have those little segments in the beginning where you'd be doing stand-up, and then my grandma, bless her heart, she passed away last year, but comedy if I did my homework, because we lived with my grandparents when my parents were going to school. So till I was 6, I lived with my grandparents, and I could go stay over there on the weekends on Friday if I did my homework. Now that I'm a parent, it's like, what a deal. I did my homework and I get to go away for a night. Like, wow. But I think, so when I was over there, I discovered Friday night stand-up on Comedy Central. When I didn't want to stay over at my grandparents anymore because, you become a teenager and you're too cool, my grandma would record on VHS Friday night stand-up every night, and she'd bring it over on Saturday, and I'd just sit there and watch all these sort of things. Comedy, like the school talent show comes up, I'd memorize like 5 minutes from a Nick Swartzen special and go do it. And so I did that, and when I dropped out of University of Oregon, I moved back with my parents. I was really on the brink of these small towns. Austin is a city. But those small towns, when you're 21, 22, you're really on the verge of becoming a townie, if you know what I mean. Like, anyway, so I just started driving twice a week to Sacramento. So I was working at a grocery store, get off at 3, drive to Sac, do 5 minutes, drive home, go to the grocery store, do that twice a week. And then that's really what took me to San Francisco. And I did comedy for 5 or 6 years. That's why, it's a thing looking back now, because I think looking at the time, a lot of comics were like producing open mics in like, it's always a Chinese restaurant. Anyway, they're producing these shows and they're putting so much money into it and they're making no money at it. Like, they're putting so much effort in promoting it and getting people to go, and it's just a free open mic night. So I started going back to the small town, and you can rent during like every city or every small town has some old theater from the 30s. Mm-hmm. And you can rent that thing for $1,000 a night. So I broke down this business model. I'm like 19 1920 when all this is happening. And I got 3 businesses to give me $300 a piece. So my overhead is $100. Uh-huh. Headliner are people from Sacramento, my, comedy friends. Headliner got $3 a ticket. Feature got $2 a ticket, and then I hosted it, so I didn't cost anything. And then I gave each business $1 per ticket, if that makes sense. So the show cost me, what is that, $8 a ticket. And funny story, weird name drop thing, but Tom Hanks' mom lives in my hometown. And she's passed away, so I don't think he goes up there anymore. But he had donated a lot of money to this theater. And the night of my first show, he was in town and he bought the doors for the theater. So he was standing outside the theater looking at these doors that he bought. And someone was like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And he was like, "Oh, I just bought my ticket to this comedy show tonight." Didn't show up. But that got around the internet and we sold 500 or 600 tickets or some shit like that. And so really the businesses that gave me the money, the $300 a piece, they all got their money back plus some. Plus a couple $100.
Yeah.
It got around Sacramento that I had this theater because everyone wants to play a theater and I was making money at it. So I just was doing 2 of those a month. Some were successful. Some were not successful. I got on the road a couple times with, a comic that I was able to play 2,500, 3,000 seat room and stuff like that. So I look at that time now. I think there was a time in my life when I look back and I felt like just such a failure because by the time it's done, you have $3,000 in your savings account. You're poor. You're living show to show. Mm-hmm. And I was 26 and I had literally nothing. I didn't have a car. I didn't have, all these things that a 26-year-old you think should have and everyone has it figured out. But I only say that because when I was producing these shows, I was booking at the end of it. I was reaching out to creative artists and Paradigm Talent Agent and big legit talent agencies in LA. And I was signing contracts and making deals. And I didn't realize it until the podcast, how valuable the skill that was for me. Because really what I do now, I don't know how many architecture podcasts there are, but there's not a lot that get the guests that I get. And I'm sorry for listeners if that sounds arrogant, but it's kind of the truth. And I think it is because of that time I spent as a comic. And so looking back, I think it's probably the best thing I probably could have done for me or my family now, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's...
Sorry, that was a long rant.
No,
that's great. That's the kind of perspective that's interesting. That's what we want to know about.
Yeah, no, we want to know... This isn't as polished maybe as the design.
No. I don't mean that. I don't mean that by any means.
We want to know who you are. So
I'm only saying it as I don't think it's a coincidence that I'm doing what I'm doing now because it's what I've been doing since I was 18 years old. Yeah.
Well, okay. So, but how did you really make the jump into architecture?
I was poor. My dad was still doing those spec houses back in Red Bluff and I hadn't had a job in 3 years. And I never wanted to have one again. So I picked the most time intensive degree you can possibly have. No, my plan was I got a bootleg copy of AutoCAD on Craigslist and I sat there with a book for 10 hours and I retaught myself AutoCAD and I heard about Revit, got a bootleg copy of Revit and I bought a book and I sat there and learned it and I just I could do this for a long time. So I wanted to take over and work with my dad and what he was doing. And then I found out, if you don't make a certain amount of money, the state will give you a Pell Grant to go to community college. So I just started taking architecture classes and then I applied to Portland State, moved up to Portland, started taking architecture classes there. Applied to Austin, moved to Austin, and here we are.
So did you get to work with your dad for a while?
No.
No, you never did?
No, I mean, I did when I was little. He would pay me $100 to do a dimension plan for him, and that would get me whatever, you know what I mean? When you have $100 when you're 9 in a small town, I used to get it all in ones, and I'd roll it up in a wad, and then if someone would walk in, I'd go...
You need $13? I got it.
Yeah, what's it? Oh yeah, go buy you something. I just want to be like a gangster, like a, you know what I mean? Like,
That's cool.
Silly.
So when did you make the move to Austin?
2017 for grad school. So we were getting married. We got married in 2017. My wife took a more traditional path, I think, into the career workforce, and she had already moved from San Francisco to Portland for me. So we sat down. There's only so many accredited lists or accredited schools for grad school, right? So I took a red highlighter. She took an orange highlighter. I highlighted the schools. She highlighted the cities. And then we did the little Venn diagram of where we wanted to move. And I applied to a bunch of them. And it was between here and Michigan. And it was like, I went up to Ann Arbor. Well, first of all, flew out here for like the welcome weekend. It was like 75 degrees and sunny. And I flew to Michigan. It was the worst flight I've ever had in my life. The flight attendants didn't even stand up. They were just like, good luck. Hope we make it. See you soon. Click. It was horrible. I was hailing in April, and I was like, no. I called her. I was like, this isn't the spot. But also, like, looking at it now, like, Ann Arbor is not a place that we could have stayed after school and had, like, the careers that we have now. She's very successful in her career, and I think Austin is kind of a good spot for us.
So when did you start the podcast?
2018, summer after.
So shortly after you came into Austin.
Yeah, that's a Larry Speck thing. I don't know. You all know Larry Speck? Mm-mm. You don't know Larry Speck?
No.
You guys. No, Larry Speck is like the godfather of Austin architecture. He's a professor at UT. He's a partner at Page, and he's also, dude, he did like the community center, all this stuff, the master plan for 2nd Street District or the waterfront and all that stuff. But I may be quoting his credits wrong, and I'm sorry if you did one of those projects, but he's done a lot for the city of Austin is the point. But he is probably the most generous person with his time. He's donated so much of his time. I joked at the AIA or the Texas Architects Convention last year that poor Larry Speck, when I have an idea, he's about to lose a Saturday because he just keeps donating. He just keeps donating hours to helping me do, what I want to do or what I think I can do. And he's very generous, but his theory class at the University of Texas is probably the best class I've taken in all of my architecture studies. And his last 3 classes is touring projects, and then the designers is in there talking about how they designed it, and then they sit down and talk about their career path. And I was like, oh, this should just be a podcast. And then I went down the whole Google search of how to start a podcast, and I started Austin Firms. Larry was episode 2, Matt was episode 1, and kind of hopped around Austin for a while, and that's how it happened.
What do you think was the hope or the intent behind starting it initially?
I mean, what's your hope? Why are you guys doing this?
Well, it's probably multifaceted. I think we were just kind of talking about this the other day, but that's a good question. I mean, I think for me at least, it's kind of pushed some boundaries. I'm not the best at having a conversation, and so that was kind of a challenge for me, was to learn how to kind of open up and talk and interview and kind of learn that side of things. And it also has challenged me in other ways, like just to learn. I always had this feeling like I was the dumbest guy in the room, and I always hated that, and I never wanted to be the dumbest guy in the room. And so I try to surround myself with people who I think are way more knowledgeable and have so much wisdom, and hopefully I can, by surrounding myself with these people, I can kind of glean this knowledge and wisdom from them. So that's kind of the intent behind,
But then under that theory, and there's very famous people who have echoed this same sentiment, don't you want to be the dumbest person in the room? Don't you want to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you so that you can learn and grow? Yeah. So in a way, what you're saying, and while I understand, I don't want to be the dumbest person in the room.
Like, there's a limit.
But I want to surround myself with people that I think I'm going to grow and benefit from.
What I mean is, yes, to your point, but I was never really an avid reader. I've kind of gotten back into it, and really it's because of the podcast. I've wanted to grow my knowledge and understanding of things, And so I've really become better at disciplining myself and reading and learning as much as I can to try to be a better version of myself.
You didn't get those guns from books?
No,
those guns were from Holden Books.
I mean, that's so. I mean, working out and physical fitness is kind of part of that journey to being better. Being excellent. Because I think excellent is not just who you are while you're at work, or who you are while you're at home, or who you are while you're in school. It's all of those things combined. Like if you're to be excellent, you got to be a good dad, a good husband, a good employee, or a good business owner, or good, you have to be all of those things combined. And so part of this podcast, I think, is just a journey to try to be excellent in every way.
Well, I don't read or work out, but I think, no, I can understand that. I think when I started it was more of like, I've had this sort of background of being in front of people that I really like and really missed. You know what I mean? And don't get me wrong, when I pitched this idea, my wife was like, can't you just go to work and then go home? Like, why do you have to do this? But I think it was that. And then I saw I can be a bit of a schmoozer to a certain extent. And I saw a benefit of, like, the early days, I would go to whatever architecture firm's website, look for the highest person I could find an email address for, and that's who I was emailing. Yeah. And that's how I emailed Judy Pesic at Gensler. And 6 months later, not because of Judy, but I was interning at Gensler, and I said, hey, Judy, remember that podcast we did? You think Art would want to do it? And she was like, oh, I don't know. Let me think. Probably. Let me reach out to him. And then she came up to my desk 30 minutes later and she said, have you ever met Art Gensler? And I said, no. And she goes, you want us to fly you out there? You can just do that interview in person. And I was like, sure. So Gensler flew me to San Francisco. I stayed with a friend and went down to the office, talked to Art for an hour, flew back. And it's sort of that, I saw it as a benefit for me, the networking aspect, to get a job in Austin, because Austin architecture is not that big of an environment, I guess. But just networking in general, like, it's so valuable, and I wish young designers realized there's like a competitiveness to architecture that I think doesn't need to exist. And the networking aspect, I think, is so much more important. Mm-hmm. In school also, like, everyone's doing kind of their own projects, and it's just not as collaborative as I think the real world is. No,
I agree. And I would...
That's a good point.
Yeah. I'd add that to the list of, reasons why, to start the podcast, is just to meet awesome people. I mean, sitting here having a conversation with you, never...
Not too awesome. But
no. You're too hard on yourself. Yeah. But, okay, so... But what's it like, you've had some really, world-renowned architects on your podcast. I mean, do you get starstruck, or do you get nervous, or do you, are there any people out there you're like, wow, it kind of hits you, like, I'm sitting down with so-and-so, and like, I didn't picture this.
I had a former employer ask me this the first time I interviewed Bjarke Ingels, and that was a very nerve-wracking interview, I will say. If you don't know, he's like, I just think, if for people that have listened from the beginning, we're 147 episodes in.
Wow.
Which, thank you for saying that. For people that don't understand how much of an undertaking that is,
that's an accomplishment.
It's a big accomplishment. And I say that as humbly as I can. I'm very proud of how many episodes I produced. Mm-hmm. But the earlier episodes is that I really didn't talk that much. And when I did, it was always like a sort of reserved voice, like I was pulling my voice back as I was talking, unsure if I could talk. And I've hired, or I have a business partner that is like 26, 27 that does all my editing now. And he was pretty honest when I first started editing. He's like, dude, you're boring. He's like, he's like, cause him and I talk and it's a lot more like, you know, joking around and stuff. And he's like, you have like a personality, but like you're not showing it. And I've like slowly tried to open up a little bit more and like I don't know, once you kind of get used to talking to these people and to understand it's a mutually beneficial thing. Like admittedly, they're probably giving more to me than I am to them. But at the same time, like PR is part of the business. And so they're doing their job. I'm doing my job and everyone's on that same page. And I have found that a majority of these people are pretty nice and lovely people to talk to. Like oftentimes they get on, I give like my 5-minute, like, this is what we're going to do. Like, this is, my internet cuts out, stay on the call. Like, all these sort of disclaimers up front. And I don't provide notes up front. I just start talking. I probably should write more questions, admittedly, but after it's over, we'll sit there and talk for 10 or 15 minutes and then hang up and they go their way and I go mine. And it's actually surprising how small of an industry the PR world is. Cause I had a couple big breakthroughs, but one of them was that there's a PR firm in New York that actually represents like 9 of the biggest architecture firms in the country. So once I just sat there and just boom, 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 ran through because it's the same woman that was just booking every single one. And then she left and I was like, oh no. And then I had a Genie Gang interview like a month ago and the person I was dealing with was like, I'm going to be out of town. Talk to Jill. And she's like, hey, Aaron, I don't know if you remember 3 years ago, we booked all these podcasts together. I'm just over here at Studio Gang now. So it's all like it's a really small world once you're able to like get into it. That it's much easier.
Critical mass.
Much easier than people think. In the architecture world, to be honest, like it's a very niche podcast. It's a very niche market. So you're not going to get the Rogan number or like these massive podcasts. It's just not going to happen. But it's just, I don't know. Everyone's been very generous with me and I think they're just pretty nice people.
So, okay. So I want to ask a question. I'm not an architect. So you being an architect, what?
I'm a designer, not an architect. Designer.
Okay, designer. But what makes? It might be a dumb question, but what makes an architect like the Taylor Swift of architects? You know, like where? How do you know? Like when you get to that point as an architect,
that might be something. To me, it's the same in comedy. I can draw so many parallels to stand up as I can to architecture, but these are opinions. If you disagree, disagree. But I think your comedy ability is only as good as your marketing ability. You can be a terrible comic, but you can book a lot of gigs and you're going to make a pretty decent money. And I think you see that same thing in construction and you see that same thing in architecture. And
I do. I see exactly what you mean.
Yeah. And so I think,
well put.
With these people that I'm talking to, we'll say Bjarka, that he's just really, really good at hopping on a call with, you know what I mean? Like he just has a switch that he can flip. And I don't think there's a lot of people that can do that, but I also don't think it's a coincidence that he's in the place that he's in. If that makes sense. And I think that with a lot of good designers, like, I don't think it's a coincidence that they are in the place that they're at.
So, architectural record.
Yeah.
Tell me about, okay, so how did all that come about? So, you had your podcast for how many years?
2
years, and then you're now partnered with Architectural Record. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so we've been together, I'd say, since October 2020. And they've been really the best partner. And again, they've been around for so long and they have such a legacy. I think it's just an honor to kind of be a part of it. But they've been really wonderful. We partnered together because they liked what I was doing. And for the most part, they've literally just said, like, keep doing what you're doing. I have a little bit more responsibility with sending them headshots and like promotional material for their website and everything. But really, they've just been a pleasure to work with. I don't think I could find really a better partner. It is a bit of a push and pull. Like we have a call occasionally where I was like, what do you think about this guest? And now really how it's evolved is we're trying to pair the podcast with stories they're writing. So they'll do like one example is Olsen Kundig and Faulkner Architects in Truckee had their house of the month was being featured. And so I had both of them on there to kind of talk about their house and stuff like that. So we're trying to, again, it's cross-promoting, mutual beneficial relationship that just benefits everyone all around. And, I've been featured on other blogs and other architecture publications, and I'm really happy that I ended up where I ended up.
Is there a dream guest that you haven't had yet that you've got on the list?
Yeah, Peter Zumthor. I can do some pretty embarrassing things. I just shamelessly added as many Zumthor employees as I could find on LinkedIn and sent them all messages. And then they gave me, I got someone to give me an email, and I email it for 4 years now, every 6 months. Hey! And I update it we're doing better than we were. You really should do this. Yeah. And then every time they're just like, Mr. Zumthor is so busy with projects, he cannot sleep or eat, and he does not have time to do whatever, the excuse is or whatever. So, that's the one, but I mean, he lives in the hills of Switzerland, and I don't think he's not hurting for press. You know what I mean?
That's cool. The one thing I tell people, the one superpower we have is polite persistence.
Persistence.
That's
probably good advice. That's probably good advice.
So what impact do you think designed podcast has had?
Oh man, I don't know.
Okay, so maybe,
there's times when you feel early podcasting where you're I'm just talking to myself. My hope is, it's evolved a little bit. So early on, it was more career focused, how do you go through your career? How do you get to where you want to be? And so I hope the young architects kind of take that on and have learned something from it, the people. And I think, our demographic is on the younger side of architecture. And I don't think I'm the first one to say this, it is a bit of a dated field where it is kind of the good old boy network, so to speak, in a lot of ways still, even though people are working very hard to change that. It somehow feels that way occasionally. My hope is that you see interviews, and if you're at a university, you have the ability to go to a lecture, but you're really constrained by who the university has booked. And what I think I've done is cultivate a library where you have 100 so far, 147, 149 next month, 152 the month after that. A library of resources and lectures that kids can actually get a long form conversation out of and a story out of. It's not a 30-second interview question or a 2-minute YouTube video. It's a 45 to 60-minute conversation on a building, a career, a person, whatever the topic may be. And so I hope it's just providing some sort of library or resource for people when they're researching these things.
That's well said. Well, Adrian, you have any questions? You're over there twirling your mustache. You look intrigued.
Ask my questions when they come up.
Well, okay. So if you could look back on your career, if you could talk to a younger version of yourself, what advice would you give? Is there anything you would change, or would you do it all the same?
I mean, it's worked out, but I think, I have, just by the nature of myself, I'm from a small town. There's not a lot happening, and I'm just a pretty self-conscious person. And I think, but I also weirdly have a lot of belief in myself. So I feel like I have both of these sort of things. I think just relax. You're gonna be fine. It'll be okay. Everyone is somehow walking around and talking. I think about this raising kids. They're not reading and they're not going to the bathroom, and somehow every adult is using the bathroom and walking and talking and eating themselves. So it's all gonna be okay.
I have that same perspective. I've been reading a lot of parenting books, and because that's very relevant to what I'm going through. So I've been reading a lot of parenting books, and yeah, that's kind of you get one opinion here and then one opinion here, and then your parents come at you with another. You
ever seen the car seats we had when we were kids? The fact that we're here having this conversation.
Well, exactly, and so but you sit back and you think you know what, I think it'll be okay.
It's all
Like
good.
it's you don't have to overthink it.
You don't, but you have to keep trying hard.
Well, absolutely.
You can't just go, it'll be okay, it'll all work out. You have to keep pushing and work hard.
Agreed. No,
put your head down, work hard, then it'll all work out.
What was that quote you told me? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I think
all right.
No, it was about kids and always raising the bar. I think Shan actually gave you that quote.
Oh, yes, Shan did.
Yeah.
They will raise to the bar that you set. And what his message was don't underestimate them. Like, put the bar as high as you can, they will raise to that bar. And I've heard people say, oh, well, whatever the achievement is, I want to make that achievement. I'm okay if you fall a little short, because then you tried as hard as you could. If you always achieve your goal, then you should have tried harder, right? You could have gone a little bit farther.
Sure.
So, yes, they will raise to the bar that you set. But the other one I like is, I'm an expert on everything up till today. From today on, I'm making it all up. But from today back, I'm an expert.
Yeah. So, what does the future look like? What does the future look like for design podcast, your career? What are your architecture? What do you think?
I don't know, to be honest. Like, I'm not, I got into architecture as it seemed like a good job sort of perspective. I was never like chasing buildings like you hear a lot of people and Legos and all these sort of nice stories. So, I have a lot of interests, and I kind of am really liking the marketing aspect of things. That's just an interest I have. So I don't know what the quote unquote future holds. I want to say that I'm in a really good spot with the podcast. It could end tomorrow. And, that it is kind of a fleeting thing. Like no one just has unlimited success forever. And so I want to make it last while I can. And I think, that's why I want to reach out and help start a podcast or early podcast, because I had Bob Borson that did the exact same thing for me. He didn't have to talk to me, and he really took a lot of time out of his days to kind of talk and coach me through a lot of these things. And that would be my advice for young podcasts, because there seems to be with the cohort that I came up with, we were all very friendly with one another, and we're all doing really well now. This was 5 or 6 years ago, of podcasts that I'm talking about. There seems to be a more competitive nature with the new podcasts, and I wish there was just a little more collaboration. I had a guest cancel, and I was like, no matter what, there's an episode coming out every week. There is one coming out every week. Yeah. And I got canceled on a Tuesday. I released them on a Wednesday. I called the other podcast, and they were my guests talking about architecture podcasts. And so we had this sort of thing. And I don't know if you know Julia Gamelina. She runs Madam Architect, a very, very successful entrepreneur in the AEC space. And her and I, we don't talk as much as we used to, I guess is a better way to put it. But we had a conversation. I had heard about her during an interview when the woman I was interviewing said, you should read Madam Architect. And I joked with Julia when I was talking to her and met her 2 years later. And I was like, oh, she said that. And I was instantly like, edit that out. Because I wasn't going to advertise for anyone else. And she joked. She was like, I would have done the same 2 years ago. But I think there is a confidence in it's okay to talk about acknowledging that other people exist. If you're sure of yourself, there's room for everyone. It doesn't have to be only people are going to listen to my podcast or only people are going to listen to your podcast. It's people want content. So the more quality content that is out there, the better it is for everybody. This is my advice for young architects or young podcasters. You shouldn't shun away from other podcasters. You should look at what they're doing and try to learn from them as much as possible. And that's what Bob did for me. Yeah,
I agree wholeheartedly. It's such a big arena, and there's so many people, and everybody has a different background and a different story, and that's always been interesting to me. Is you kind of see, everybody sees you maybe from this outside perspective of you're.
I also want to say I try to hide myself as much as possible. There's no pictures of me on the podcast Instagram. I'm just a voice, and that's the way I like it. So they're talking about putting yourself out there. I'm like, I'm okay from behind the scenes.
No, perfect. But yeah, I mean, but it's that, but it's getting to know, how you got here. Like, how did you get into the podcasting? How what's your story and what's your background? And that's always been interesting to me, is like what path, did people take to get where they're at? And that's always been, every single person has like such an interesting background. Everybody's got a story, and they're all unique. Every single one of them. And that's always been, it's super interesting. It's just like I said, you kind of have this image of somebody in your head that maybe you see on TV, or you listen to every day on the radio, and then you kind of get to know them as an individual. And I think that's really cool. And so with that, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on. It's late, you're taking time away from your family.
Same deal. So thank you for accommodating my children's schedule.
No.
Like, can we record it?
But
Midnight?
I have an important question.
Go for it.
You asked me if I had a question. I
Yes,
have an important question.
shoot it out there.
Aside from obviously your priorities are your wife and your 2 sons, those are obviously your priority. Outside of that, outside of work, what do you geek out on?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think stand-up is one.
Do you still go and perform anywhere? Do you still
No, not. This is my take on it. There's guys out there and women. There's people out there that are really trying to make a career out of it, especially in Austin right now with the comedy scene has blown up immensely. So I would dabble when we first moved here, like a couple weeks a month or a couple weeks a year. I'd go like real hard, like I'm going to do this again. But I'm taking stage time away from someone that's really trying to do it. And so I don't want to do that. So I think comedy is one. I really like to golf. I've golfed since I was like a little kid. But other than that, like, I'm a pretty basic dude. I don't do a lot. You know what I mean?
I don't know if I'd say comedy and golf are basic. I don't know anyone else who does comedy, and I think that's awesome. I think that the confidence that gives you, the comfortability of being able to talk in front of people and not worry about slipping something up and saying something that's foolish or silly, because that's what you go out there to do things like that. So I think that's an incredible foundation for where you have got.
No, I agree. Because isn't that like the number one fear for people is public speaking?
Dude, I've gotten a lot worse at public speaking. Like, a lot worse. Maybe I've always been that bad and I just haven't realized it until I was in my mid-30s. But again, we're talking, this is a 24-year-old Aaron. So I'm like a different person now. But there is a certain freedom, though, to that. And there is no better feeling than going in front of a few hundred people and saying something. And this is why I always fight with people about, like, can you say that? Can you not say that? And in terms of comedy, in terms of comedy, because I think comedy, if you're watching it on TV, you're having a different experience than the people are there. Mm-hmm. And comedy is a conversation between comedian says A, and the audience will not discriminate if you're famous, if you're not famous, if you're not funny, you're not funny, and they're not going to laugh.
React.
Yes. So whether is that actually funny, like the conversation is over when the crowd reacts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It's a conversation between the comedian and the audience.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
So
my wife and I just went this last weekend and we saw Jim Gaffigan.
Funny.
At the Moody Theater. So I got a story. I'm gonna tell my story.
Tell your story.
So
like we're like architecture comedy podcast on this big wave.
Dude, this goes
more interesting than just architecture.
Yeah. So it was date night, all right? And so we went out. This was last weekend. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
So we go out. And we've had this plan for a while. You know how it is with kids. You got to plan months in advance.
My friend's like, hey, can you do anything tonight? I'm like, why would you text me? Is that a joke?
So we go out. We actually go to Fogo de Chao. That's probably like one of our favorite restaurants. Well, just a Brazilian steakhouse in general.
Churrascaria.
Yeah. Just
my wife is Brazilian, so she's all about the churrascarias.
Oh man, they're phenomenal. So we go. Fogo has a new location in Austin. We tried it. I liked it. I didn't care for the interior too much, but that's beside the point. So we go. We get dinner, and then it's just a couple blocks from the theater. So we walk to the theater, and dude, the line is so long. I mean, it's wrapped.
It's the one downtown.
Yeah, the one right off.
W.
So what?
At the W.
I think so.
The smaller one.
Yes. Yeah.
Everything is a Moody in Austin now. There's like Moody Amphitheater, movie, whatever. The small one.
This is a small one. Yeah. So it's the line is wrapped around the building. It goes down a couple blocks. It's a super long line to get in. And so thanks. We basically there's a line to get in line. So we start walking, you know, and there's people outside telling you where to go. Like, oh, keep going, just keep walking. And we're fully trusting them. They're like, sure, yeah, I guess we're going the right way. And so we keep going, and finally, you know, after maybe 5 minutes, we make it through the back of the line, and then you got to turn around and go back the other way. Go back the way you came. So we're waiting in line, and there ended up being kind of a break in the line, like right in front of us. And, you know, my wife and I are talking, and we're having a good time, and there's this couple, like, standing off to the side, and I assume they're married, but there was a couple, and they were looking up at the buildings and talking and pointing, and all of a sudden they just kind of, they just cut right in front of us. You know, they think that I didn't notice or that we didn't see them.
There's 7,000 people. What's two more?
Because, you know, we're talking, we're having a good time, and so they think they can just slip right in line and we won't notice. And so I let a minute go by, and I let them think they got away with, you know.
You're close enough.
I think I let them think they got away with it. And at first I was like, you know what, we're almost to the entrance. I'm not going to say anything. It doesn't really matter. But I was like, no, I'm totally going to say something. So I leaned forward, and I'm like, I saw what you did. And the guy turns around, he's like, oh, well, how does that make you feel? You know, very odd way to respond. He's like, how does that make you feel? And then the wife's like, oh, well, can we buy you a drink? And can we buy you something? And there's a bunch of shops along the route, and they're trying to, you know, like buy my wife a new purse and all this stuff. And we're like, no, just stop talking to us. Like, I regret opening my mouth. Just leave us alone. Like, I'm not going to say anything. I don't care. So we get inside, and we're down on the floor, and I was like, well, I'll go get us a couple drinks. And there's a bar basically at the back, and there's a long line. So I'm in the back of the line and waiting patiently, and I look up, and at the front of the line is this couple. This couple they're about to order. So I wait. I wait patiently, and like right as they're about to order, I sprint to the front of the line, and I push this guy out of the way. I make sure he knows I'm there. I'm like, excuse me, sir. It's like, I think this is my spot. And he looks at me, he's like, ah, shit. He's like, I know this guy. And so I order my drink, and these are expensive drinks. They're maybe
$12.
Yeah, it was
$12 Bud Lights.
Dude, $13 for a Dos Equis, and maybe $11 or $12.
Every bar in San Francisco.
Oh
man.
God! And so I get us a couple of drinks, and I order, and I'm like, and it's on this guy's tab. He's paying, and the bartender kind of looks at him like, "Are you sure?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's fine." And so he looks at me, and he's like, damn it, like I've been caught. So he probably spent, you know, $40, $50 on drinks at the end of the night. And so I get my drinks, and I turn to walk away. He's like, that was well played. That was very well played.
How was the show?
Oh, it was great, dude. He was hilarious. I mean, he's been around for 20 years doing comedy, more than that.
He probably started in the 80s. Seinfeld has a thing about like the number of years you've been doing comedy is like your age. Like after 1 year, you're like a 1-year-old. After 2 years, you're like a 2-year-old. It's a tough gig. It's a tough gig.
It is
That
tough
could
gig.
be similar to lots of industries.
I don't know. It's pretty rough.
That one is pretty rough.
You ever driven 5 hours to a place to find out they're going to pay you in alcohol, and you're like, how am I supposed to drive home? I have.
Fair enough.
Like, I guess I'm going to sleep in my car tonight. Like, I don't know.
Well, who would be your favorite comedian?
Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah.
I mean, I like him, and I don't know if you know who Nick Schwartzen is.
The name's familiar. I don't know if I've heard his.
He's in like every Adam Sandler movie.
Oh yeah.
He's
Okay,
like the random dude that's not David Spade.
Yeah.
But Jerry Seinfeld, I think for me is like the OG. He's a classic.
Yes, so. That's true. Well, Aaron, I appreciate your time coming on. I had a blast. I'd like to do this again sometime if you're willing and able. So I appreciate you. Cheers.
Cheers, y'all.
Cheers. I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this discussion. For more information on upcoming episodes, follow us on Instagram. We want to hear from you, so leave us some feedback to help us shape future episodes.